He gave his leftovers to a hungry little girl, but what she said next changed his entire life. Richard Blake sat at the far corner of an elegant restaurant tucked away in Midtown Manhattan, the kind of place where deals were sealed over aged whiskey and business cards passed as currency. The room was filled with the gentle hum of soft jazz and quiet conversations, but Richard heard none of it. His mind was buried deep in a thick stack of papers sprawled across his table, documents entirely in Spanish, legal, technical, dense. A critical acquisition involving one of Spain's fastest-growing logistics firms had reached its final phase, and the paperwork needed urgent review. The problem? His trusted translator had dropped out hours earlier without explanation. No replacement, no warning. Just silence. Richard had always prided himself on control. Control of his time, his company, his image. But tonight, with the clock ticking and his appetite gone, control was slipping. He leaned back in his chair, running a tired hand through his hair. The glass of whiskey next to him remained half full, untouched. His dinner, grilled salmon and asparagus, cooled on the plate. His thoughts spun in circles, trying to recall any Spanish phrases from his college days, any fragment of understanding that could help him salvage this mess. But nothing came. His phone buzzed again. Another message from legal asking for an update. Another reminder that the deal couldn't wait. He was about to respond with a vague excuse when a small voice interrupted him. "Excuse me, sir, can I eat what you're not finishing?" Richard turned, slightly startled. Standing by his table was a little girl, 6, maybe 7 years old, barefoot, with blonde hair braided into 2 thin plaits. Her red t-shirt was faded, her denim skirt frayed at the hem. Her big blue eyes stared up at him, wide and hungry but steady, without a trace of fear. He blinked, confused for a second. Was she alone? How did she get into a place like this? "You want my leftovers?" he asked, glancing at the half-eaten plate. The girl nodded solemnly. "I'm hungry." He looked around, expecting someone, anyone, to step in. A parent. A waiter. A manager. But no one came. The room carried on as if nothing unusual had happened. "Take it," he said, pushing the plate toward her. "I can't eat. I've got too much going on." She didn't immediately dig in. Instead, her eyes fell on the papers in front of him. "That's Spanish," she said, pointing. "Yeah. And it's a problem," he muttered. She hesitated, then added, "I can read it. If you want." Richard let out a short breath of disbelief. "You can translate legal documents? At your age?" The girl didn't flinch. "My mom was a translator. She taught me. Before she got sick." Something about her voice stopped him from brushing her off. She wasn't lying. Her words were too direct, too certain. Out of nothing but curiosity, or perhaps desperation, he pulled one sheet from the pile and handed it to her. "Go ahead. Let's see what you've got." The girl looked at the paper, her finger moving along the lines. "This part here," she began, "means they're charging an extra fee for international logistics storage. But it's written like it's optional. You can decline it." Richard froze. She was right. He knew enough to understand that. "And this clause," she continued, "says they'll retain partial ownership of your assets in Spain unless you reject this paragraph. You should reject it." Richard leaned forward, stunned. Her pronunciation was flawless. Her comprehension was beyond anything he'd expected. For the first time that evening, he truly looked at her, not as a street child asking for scraps, but as someone who had just handed him the missing piece of a multi-million-dollar puzzle. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lacey," she said. "Where are your parents?" Her expression shifted. "My mom died last year. We used to live in a shelter. Now I don't know." Richard stared at her, unable to respond. The room had grown quiet around them, or maybe his awareness had narrowed to just her small frame, her soft voice, and the impossible story she carried in her eyes. Without thinking, he said the only thing that came to him, "Do you want to come with me? Just for tonight. I'll get you some food. And shoes." She hesitated, then nodded. And with that nod, something shifted inside Richard Blake, a man who had built empires, led corporations, stood on stages, but who, in that moment, realized that the most unexpected meetings could change a life more than any boardroom ever had. As soon as they stepped out of the restaurant, the sharp chill of the evening air wrapped around them. Richard instinctively took off his blazer and placed it gently over Lacey's shoulders. The fabric hung heavily on her small frame, but she hugged it close like it was the warmest thing she'd ever worn. He looked down at her bare feet, now stepping cautiously on the cold pavement, and without saying a word, he led her to his waiting car parked by the valet. The driver opened the door with a confused glance, but Richard's nod silenced any questions. Once inside, the quiet hum of the luxury vehicle filled the silence as Lacey stared at the glowing city lights rushing past her window. She didn't speak, but her expression shifted from cautious to curious as they drove deeper into Manhattan. Richard tapped out a quick text to his assistant, "Call my tailor. I need warm clothes, age 6 or 7, girls. Drop off at my apartment. Also, food." He hesitated and added, "Toys too. Something comforting." Then he put the phone away. He wasn't sure what he was doing. He wasn't the kind of man who brought strangers, especially children, into his private world. His life was sharp-edged, minimal, designed for control and output, not softness. But this girl had cracked something open inside him in the most unexpected way, and for once, he didn't feel like analyzing it. They arrived at his penthouse just past midnight. The elevator opened directly into the marble-floored living room, which was flooded with soft, warm light. Lacey stepped in cautiously, her eyes widening as she took in the massive windows, tall bookshelves, and sleek modern furniture. It was the kind of space designed for prestige, not play. Richard suddenly saw it through her eyes, sterile, cold, and lifeless. "You can sit anywhere you like," he said, unsure of how to speak to her in this context. She wandered slowly, fingers brushing the edge of the glass coffee table before settling onto the sofa, legs tucked under her. Within 30 minutes, the assistant arrived with shopping bags, clothing, and food from one of the best late-night diners in the city. While Lacey devoured a grilled cheese sandwich and tomato soup, Richard sat opposite her, pretending to scroll through his emails but mostly just watching her. The way she held the spoon with both hands. The way her eyes lit up when she tasted something warm. There was nothing performative in her gratitude, just silent relief. When she finished, he handed her a new pair of pajamas and pointed toward the guest room down the hall. "It's yours for tonight," he said. "Bathrooms inside. Take your time." She returned 20 minutes later, face freshly washed, her new pajamas slightly oversized but cozy. She was holding a small stuffed bear from the gift bag, gripping it tightly by the arm. Richard stood awkwardly in the hallway, uncertain of how to say goodnight. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I haven't slept in a real bed in a long time." His throat tightened. "You're safe here," he replied. "Get some rest." When he closed the door behind her, he stood in the hallway for a long time, staring at nothing. His apartment, usually so silent and serene, now carried the faint sounds of another heartbeat. He sat in his office, stared at the contract she had helped him read, and realized he owed more than just gratitude. He owed her an answer, to why a child like her was on the street, why no one had come looking, why the system had failed someone so bright and capable. He pulled out his laptop, opened a private database, and began typing her name, Lacey. Age, unknown. Last known location, unknown. He kept typing late into the night, reaching out to contacts, accessing social worker networks, even police reports. There was barely any record of her. It was as if she'd slipped between the cracks of the world. By the time he finally stood up, the sun was beginning to rise. The sky outside had turned a pale violet, and for the first time in years, Richard didn't feel tired after an all-nighter. He walked down the hallway and opened the door just a crack. Lacey was fast asleep, her small form curled beneath the blanket, the stuffed bear tucked against her chest. And in that moment, watching her breathe softly in the quiet, Richard knew something had changed. Not just for her, but for him too. He wasn't just a man trying to close a business deal anymore. He was the beginning of something bigger, something he couldn't yet name, but already felt deep in his bones. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the wide windows of Richard's penthouse, casting long golden lines across the floors. Lacey was still asleep when Richard stepped out of his bedroom, already dressed in a tailored suit, but with none of the urgency that usually pushed him out the door. He moved more slowly now, pausing by the guest room door, listening. When he gently opened it, he saw her curled up just as he had left her the night before, the stuffed bear still in her arms, the soft rise and fall of her breath steady and calm. She looked smaller in sleep, even more fragile somehow, but also peaceful, as if for the first time in a long time, she trusted the world not to fall apart while she rested. He didn't wake her. Instead, he made a quiet call to his assistant and postponed all his meetings until the afternoon. For the first time in over a decade, the world of deals and contracts and shareholder reports could wait. Today, there were more important things to understand. By the time Lacey woke up, breakfast was already set on the kitchen island. Real pancakes, eggs, fruit, and a glass of orange juice. She approached the food hesitantly, like it might vanish if she reached for it too quickly. Richard sat across from her, coffee in hand, watching without pressure. "Eat as much as you want," he said, and she did, slowly at first, then with more confidence. Between bites, she looked around the apartment with curiosity. "Do you live here alone?" she asked. He nodded. "Always have." Her face scrunched a little, as if that answer was hard to understand. "No kids? No wife?" He smiled faintly. "Nope. Just me and work. Until now, I guess." After breakfast, they moved into the living room, where he brought over the documents she had translated. "Can you tell me how you knew all this?" he asked. Lacey looked down at her hands. "My mom was really smart. She used to do translation work from home. Spanish, French, sometimes even Portuguese. She homeschooled me for a while. Said books were safer than most people." Richard could see the truth of that written across her face. "And after she passed," he asked gently. "Shelters, mostly," she answered. "Some were okay. Some were bad. I ran away from one a few months ago. It didn't feel safe anymore." He leaned back, trying to process the weight of what she had just said so simply. She was 6, maybe 7, and had been through more instability in a year than most adults faced in a lifetime. It didn't make sense. How could someone like her, so smart, so articulate, just disappear into the system? He made more calls that day, not to colleagues or clients, but to child services, hospitals, old shelter records. He wanted to find proof of her story, a file, a birth certificate, something that confirmed she existed. But again and again, he hit walls. In the system, Lacey was barely more than a ghost. Meanwhile, the girl remained calm, almost too calm, like she had already learned not to expect too much from adults. She sat in the office area with a children's book he had ordered that morning, flipping pages slowly, lips moving silently as she read. Every so often she would glance up, as if checking to make sure he was still there, and he always was. Later that afternoon, he took her shopping, not because he liked the idea of showing off, but because she needed things. Shoes, proper clothes, a backpack, warmer pajamas. As they walked through the store, she held his hand without hesitation. When he asked her opinion about a dress or jacket, she answered directly, sometimes with a nod, sometimes with an unimpressed shrug that made him chuckle. They stopped for ice cream afterward, sitting on